Before dawn's pale glow crested the jagged skyline of Glacier Peak, Elena Carter tightened the straps on her crampons and inhaled the thin alpine air through frozen eyelashes. Even at minus 15 degrees Celsius, her blindfolded world was alive with texture. The rasp of ice under steel points, the hiss of Thomas Rivera's exhalations in his insulated hood, and the soft padding of Juno's black Labrador paws on the hard blue ice. Thomas, a veteran guide with 20 climbs of this route behind him, probed the route ahead with his ice axe, tapping crevasses to test their depth. He paused to check Elena's tethered harness line. 5 meters to the next anchor, he murmured, voice calm against the wind's moan. Elena's gloved hand brushed the knurled shaft of his pole as she leaned forward, trusting his every movement. Behind them, Juno threaded between the climbers with practiced surety. Trained for whiteout conditions and steep slopes, she kept her nose to the ridgeline, ears swiveling at every distant echo. When Thomas called a change of direction, Juno shifted her weight in a subtle tug of the harness handle, a silent cue that kept Elena on course. A shaft of weak morning light illuminated a patch of seracs, towering ice pinnacles threatening to collapse without warning. Thomas whispered, "Stay close," and Elena felt the Labrador's warm body press against her leg in affirmation. The trio paused at a narrow ice bridge, its surface so transparent that the glacial gorge yawned far below. Juno crouched, growled softly, and nudged Elena's hand toward the safer snowbank flank. With that single, gentle signal, Juno saved them from a hidden weakness in the ice. Guided by touch, sound, and 4 instinctive paws, Elena and Thomas edged across the bridge, the world reduced to the sled quiet of snow and ice, every heartbeat echoed by Juno's steady padding in the white silence. By 6:20 a.m., the wind had risen to a shrill howl, whipping snow into swirling eddies around the narrow ice ridge. Thomas paused mid-step. The crunch of Elena's crampons suddenly halted behind him. He pressed a gloved finger to his ear. Beneath the roar of wind and far-off serac groans, he caught a faint, mechanical rasp. Elena, feeling Thomas stiffen, froze as well. Juno, whose keen ears outmatched any human's, lifted her head and sharpened her ears toward the slope above. The Labrador's tail bristled, her body tensed like a coiled spring. Then, barely audible over the gale, came a high-pitched crack, as thin and insistent as a whip crack echoing off frozen walls. Thomas swung around. At the crest just above Elena's line of travel, a hairline fracture snaked through the ice, a tension fault inching open across the serac's face. A dim glow of pale blue light shone through the widening crack, revealing the unstable mass of overhanging ice poised to collapse. Juno's low, urgent growl rumbled against Elena's calf, her hackles raised in warning. Thomas grabbed Elena's shoulder and whispered, "Icefall! Now!" The crack thundered again, louder this time, as the serac began to shear away. Tiny shards pinged down the slope like hailstones. Without hesitation, Thomas guided Elena and Juno backward toward a rocky alcove full of overhanging granite. Each retreating step echoed with a mounting crescendo of cracking ice. At 6:23 a.m., the serac let go in a deafening roar. A wall of jagged ice and snow thundered past their shelter, the gale force blast stripping their faces and rattling their bones, but the alcove's stubborn rock held fast. As the last echoes of the icefall died, Juno stood at Elena's side, coat dusted in soft snow, silent guardian against the mountain's fury. Elena wrapped her arms around the guide dog, voice trembling, "Thank you, Juno," and Thomas exhaled, heart pounding, grateful for the dog's warning and their narrow escape from Glacier Peak's hidden crack of doom. Thomas had just guided Elena and Juno into the rocky alcove when the Labrador's body froze, muscles coiling like loaded springs. She ignored the shelter's relative calm, ears swiveling toward the ice ridge above. Her breathing shifted, nose flaring, exhaling a soft hiss of anticipation, and then, deep in her throat, came the first low rumble of her growl. It started as a single vibration, so subtle Elena felt it through her boot, a quiver against the frozen granite. Then Juno added a second and a third, each growl rolling through her chest in quick succession, spaced by half-second pauses. Thomas recognized the pattern instantly. 3 urgent pulses of warning. Before he could react, the serac above unleashed its deadly judgment. A thunderous crash split the air as a massive cornice fractured. Ice tumbled downward in a deafening cascade, sheets of blue-white shards plummeting like shattered crystal. Snow exploded off the slope in a hurricane blast. Thomas dove on top of Elena, shielding her with his own body, Juno lunging between them, hackles raised and growls now elongated into a sustained alarm. The spray of ice and snow battered their overhanging refuge, rattling loose stones and rattling Thomas's helmet straps. Juno's growls reverberated against the granite walls, a primal guttural siren that outmatched any avalanche whistle. Elena pressed her cheek against Juno's thick fur, feeling the dog's heartbeat thump against her palm as the roar of destruction engulfed the ridge. Seconds stretched into eternity. The avalanche's roar subsided to a grinding hiss, then faded entirely. In the sudden silence, only Juno's soft, protective growls remained, reverberating through the alcove like a lullaby of survival. Elena exhaled raggedly, voice trembling. That was too close. Thomas unclasped his ice axe from his harness and held it aloft in muted triumph. If Juno hadn't warned us, he whispered, voice choked. Juno pressed her head into Elena's lap, growl subsiding into a gentle pant, her eyes bright with relief. In that moment, the trio understood that the Labrador's instinct-driven alarm had bought them the split second they needed, the difference between being buried in ice and standing, alive, on Glacier Peak's frozen heights. After the avalanche's thunderous roar dissolved into silence, Thomas pressed his forehead against the cool granite wall, heart pounding in his ears. Elena cradled Juno's head in her hands, feeling the guide dog's rapid heartbeat slow beneath her fingertips. In that stillness, Thomas realized they owed their lives to Juno's instinctive warning, the single growl that had preceded the icefall by just enough time to reach shelter. Thomas retrieved his avalanche beacon from his harness, a bright orange transceiver used to locate buried climbers. He switched it to receive mode and held it to his ear, but heard no signal. His mind raced. Instruments could not predict a serac collapse, but Juno's acute hearing had detected the subsonic groans of ice fracturing seconds before they became visible. Drawing a deep breath, he knelt beside Juno. You sensed the micro-fractures, he whispered, voice thick. He stroked her sleek coat, recalling how her ears had pricked at the faintest crack, her body taut with alert. He knew those growls followed a pattern. 3 low rumbles, a pause, then 2 final throbs, mirroring the initial breaks in the icefall's arc. Elena reached into her pack and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. She pressed record and asked Juno to growl once more. A single soft command later, Juno offered a subdued but clear grrr, rippling through the recorder's microphone with deep resonance. Thomas checked the audio waveform. 3 distinct pulses, 0.3 seconds apart, followed by a 0.7 seconds pause, then 2 slower pulses. Back in the alcove's pale light, Thomas connected the voice recorder to his tablet and overlaid the audio waveform with time-stamped data from his ice axe vibration sensor. The match was uncanny. Each growl pulse coincided with a corresponding micro-tremor recorded on his sensor, sub-threshold quakes of 0.05 G, originating within the overhanging serac. Elena watched as Thomas annotated their makeshift warning diagram on the tablet, a timeline showing Juno's growl pattern aligned to microfracture events logged by the sensor. Dogs can hear down to 20 hertz, she said softly, eyes tracing the waveform peaks. Juno must detect the low-frequency vibrations of ice cracking, long before we can see or hear them ourselves. Thomas nodded, wiping frost from the screen. He tapped out a note on his field log. Guide dog growl alarm correlates with sub-serac tremors. 5-pulse sequence precedes icefall by 3 seconds. This critical insight could transform mountaineering safety, teaching climbers to train their dogs to vocalize on sensing subsonic ice fractures, offering precious seconds to seek refuge. As wind gusted across the ridge above, and Juno curled closer to Elena's side, the team understood that their survival hinged not on GPS or weather forecasts, but on the Labrador's silent sentinel role, decoding the mountain's hidden language of cracks and quakes, and sounding a growl alarm when the ice itself could not yet speak. Thomas didn't wait for the last echoes of the icefall to die before springing into action. With the Surax collapse fresh in their ears, he gripped Elena's harness line and guided her from the rocky alcove back onto the narrow ridge. Juno bounded ahead, paws crunching on fresh powder, ears swiveling for any hint of additional fractures. "Keep low," Tomas instructed, voice urgent. He had only seconds. Icefalls often occur in multiple waves, each more deadly than the last. Ahead, the corniced serac had sheared away, leaving a jagged cliff face. Tomas angled Elena toward a gentler slope, leading up and around the serac's flank, following Juno's sure path. Every step was a test. Wind gusts threatened to pitch them off balance, and the ridge narrowed to barely a meter in places. Elena leaned into Thomas's guiding pole, trusting his pressure and the Labrador's footing. Juno paused at a narrow ice bridge, and Thomas recognized the warning in her stance. It, too, could crack under weight. He instructed Elena to edge across the bridge on her heels, crampon points splayed for maximum traction, while Juno slipped alongside on silent pads. Once across, they descended into a shallow couloir, rimmed with broken serac debris. Here, the avalanche's debris had roared through just minutes before, obliterating the snowpack to reveal granite shards. Thomas led Elena across this rocky runout, the dead zone where the serac's path had ended, until they reached undisturbed snow. Juno's tail wagged once, a sign that the danger had passed. Behind them, another distant crack sounded as the mountain exhaled its fury a final time. Thomas spared a glance over his shoulder. A fresh cornice was fracturing further up the ridge. Had they hesitated, they would have been caught in a second avalanche. Instead, guided by Juno's instincts and Thomas's unwavering lead, they had raced the mountain's collapse and emerged onto a broad snowfield where the wind's howl could no longer steal their breath. As the morning sun pierced the thin alpine air, illuminating the snow in blinding white, Elena paused to remove her goggles. Tears, part relief, part awe, traced cold lines across her cheeks. She knelt to embrace Juno, whose tongue licked gently at her mittened hand. Thomas exhaled in a steadying breath, surveying the path they had forced through the icefall's fury. In that silent moment on Glacier Peak's shoulder, the trio understood that survival on the mountain did not belong solely to human skill or technological gear, but to the unspoken bond between a climber and her guide, whether two-legged or four, and the instinctive warnings of a loyal companion whose steady growl had once again signaled the path from peril back to safety. After forcing their way past the shattered debris and the roaring onslaught of ice, Thomas led Elena and Juno onto a broad, wind-scoured snowfield that stretched beneath the sunlit summit. The roar of the avalanche had faded into a distant echo, replaced by the gentle hiss of wind, smoothing fresh drifts. Thomas knelt to remove Elena's harness, his gloved hands steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Juno stood at attention, her glossy coat dusted with powdered snow, and nudged Elena's boot with her cold, wet nose, as if to reassure her that the worst was over. Elena, her breath coming in misty clouds, lowered herself onto the snow, gingerly testing her limbs. She smiled through chattering teeth and wrapped her arms around Juno's neck, burying her face in the Labrador's thick fur. Each heartbeat now sounded calm and measured, no longer racing in sync with hidden fractures in the ice. Thomas busied himself checking their gear, straps buckled, ice screws intact, and crampons locked in place, ensuring that nothing had loosened during their frantic escape. They paused, standing together under a brilliant blue sky, the sheer drop of the seracs now framed in stark relief against the horizon. In that vast, silent expanse, Elena reached out to touch the faceted surface of a nearby ice shard, its edges polished like glass by the avalanche's force. She marveled that just moments ago, That very ridge had sought to sweep them into oblivion, and now it lay still, an indifferent witness to their survival. Thomas offered Elena a sip of water from his insulated flask and a handful of trail mix. As she ate, she watched Juno prowl the snowfield's edge, her posture alert but relaxed. The Labrador's keen eyes surveyed the terrain, still sensing every nuance of the mountain's whispers, ready to sound the alarm again if danger stirred. "Thank you, girl," Elena murmured, stroking Juno's neck. The dog's tail thumped against the snow in contented acknowledgement. Thomas looped an arm around Elena's shoulders and nodded toward the summit flagpole just a few hundred meters above. "We've earned that view," he said, smile breaking through his exhaustion. Together, the three friends continued their ascent, step by careful step, toward Glacier Peak's apex, emerging from the heart of calamity into the calm light of dawn, each pulse of Juno's loyal watch having guided them safely through the mountain's deadly wrath. By mid-morning, the wind had softened to a whisper, and the final 100 meters to Glacier Peak's summit lay before them like a silent white canvas. Thomas paused to adjust Elena's harness one last time, ensuring her tether line ran smoothly over each rocky outcrop. Juno lifted her muzzle to the breeze, nostrils flaring as she drank in the thin, pure air. Step by careful step, the trio climbed. Elena's boots crunched in unison with Thomas's, while Juno padded just ahead, scanning for any hint of danger. As they broke over the final ridge, the world opened in every direction, an endless panorama of serrated granite peaks, glacial valleys carved with ancient ice, and the vast expanse of snowfields gleaming under the sun. Elena removed her goggles and let her heart swell at the sight. She swallowed hard against the cold air and turned to Thomas. "We made it," she whispered. Thomas grinned, his cheeks flushed from exertion, and offered his arm. Juno, now lying protectively at their feet, let out a single contented sigh. They planted their summit flag, a small banner bearing the insignia of Eyes on Ice, the climbing team's organization, into the wind-scoured snow. Thomas clipped Elena's recorder to the flagpole. Its final log entry marked 9:47 a.m., exactly 4 minutes after Juno's initial growl had warned of the impending icefall. Elena knelt beside Juno, brushing a mitten across the Labrador's thick fur. "You kept us safe," she murmured, voice trembling with gratitude. Thomas produced a small engraved plaque from his pack. In recognition of Juno's instinctive warning, "Guardian of Glacier Peak." He fastened it to the flagpole where it would greet every future climber reaching the summit. Around them, the mountain lay silent but alive, as if acknowledging the debt owed to 4 paws and a single, well-timed growl. Elena and Thomas shared a quiet embrace, the enormity of their ordeal giving way to relief and awe. They refilled their water flasks, snapped summit photos with Juno proudly between them, and even shared a small piece of chocolate in true mountaineering tradition. As they began their descent, this time under clear skies and with the avalanche pass safely behind, they carried with them more than memories of terror overcome. They bore the lesson that true safety on these heights depends not only on ropes and ice axes, but on the unwavering instincts of a devoted companion. With each careful step down the ridge, Juno led the way, her bright eyes ever watchful, ensuring that the bond of trust forged in crisis would guide them all the way home.